So thanks everybody for joining us for the 3 things that will make or break your B2B podcast. We will be streaming this to LinkedIn Live as well as a webinar platform, and we'll probably have a replay later on our podcast. So today we're going to cover a lot of aspects about podcasting, specifically in the realm of B2B, and we're going to share with you some things that I think trip up some companies when they try to start a podcast. Hopefully we're going to expose those things, give you some tools and some tricks to get over those hurdles, and give you the clarity you might need to be successful in starting your own podcast. So without further ado, we've got a lot of material to cover. We're going to get right into it. So B2B podcast, it's starting to matter more and more. I know we obviously run a video production company. We deal with a lot of different types of companies creating a lot of different type of content. One of the content types that we produce is podcast content. Within the new year, we've seen an increase in interest in the podcast format, specifically video podcast format. What are some of the things that you're hearing and seeing from our clients as to why they're now more interested in this particular format?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that a lot of what we're seeing kind of follows the same suit, right? And going over that and laying the foundation for why this matters is going to be key for helping you to decide if a podcast makes sense moving forward or not. So one of the things that we've seen a lot is that trust has shifted. So buyers are trusting people over brands. We see this in the type of content people are consuming. We're seeing this in how they're consuming it. We're seeing this in the conversations that happen offline. But there's been this shift towards people wanting to hear more from people and building trust through that versus previously what has historically been the case where brand content or the company putting out content has had an impact, but we've really seen a big shift towards this in probably the last 12 months.
So yeah, that's 100% right. People are seeing that the experts they have are starting to get more traction, or said a different way, when they create content with the experts they have, they're getting more eyeballs, more reach in general. They're getting more interactions. They're getting more likes, shares, comments, whatever it is when it comes from a human being versus from the company, which also has another aspect to that. So obviously you have the human aspect of people want to interact with humans, but there's another piece to that, which is because they're involving their team or their experts in that process, they're unlocking information that wasn't available before. You're taking somebody that's been there, done that probably for decades in their career, and they're saying, hey, let me share some real knowledge with you. So the knowledge that they're getting and uncovering through formats like a podcast, they're uncovering sources of information that hasn't been available before.
Yeah, and you're definitely getting a lot of that when you are talking to a subject matter expert. And one of the great things about that is that you're able to take one video asset and have many outputs. So we're seeing that through getting your best people on camera and being able to talk about a lot of things is great, but then there's also a lot of versatility in how video podcasts can help your content engine. And the reality is that if you do it right, you can actually get over 10 different assets across any channel that you're working on from a single podcast episode.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not just creating a blog article and putting it on your website. There's a lot more versatility to starting at this particular format. So we've talked a lot about why companies are turning to the podcast format, but there is a problem that we probably need to talk about when it comes to podcasting.
Yeah, the big elephant in the room is that over 80% of B2B podcasts actually end up failing. And usually it's not their fault. It's not like the idea was bad. It's that nobody built a system that could help it succeed. And we see this all the time. And so I think that as we get into the meat of this webinar, we're going to really be able to see how these systems can contribute to the success so that if you choose to do a podcast, you're not one of the 80%.
Yeah, and that 80% is on the low end. I mean, there's a number of metrics to this. So it's between 80 and 90% usually. But I mean, when they say fail, what they're describing as failure is they stop recording, they stop producing it. So the definition of failure is the podcast ceased to exist, right? And the crazy thing is, like, if you look at the metrics, I think the number is it's 80 to 90% fail at around episode 7. So it isn't that they got in and they got this great success. It's they're barely off the ground and they're already failing. And I think that's what we're trying to put together and say, hey, let's look at the areas in which these podcasts are failing, and let's try to create systems to get over these hurdles. And that's really what we want to do today. Yeah,
and we've heard this from clients who have either launched some form of episodes or who have maybe never even got it off the ground. Sometimes people have, a room full of equipment, or we have this, hodgepodge of episodes. Some of them have seen light of day or haven't. So really digging into this and seeing the 3 podcast killers are going to help understand those issues as well.
What are the 3 podcast killers?
So in our experience, every B2B podcast that has failed can be traced back to one or multiple of these things that usually will kill your podcast. So the first one that we're going to look at, and we'll go into each of these more in depth, but the first one is no strategy. And we really see this as one of the most common scenarios where people will show up and they don't have a North Star, or they don't know their audience, or there's no real point of view. And what happens is that there's no reason to exist. So like you said, by episode 7, they get hung up, they get off track, they get defeated or burned out, and it can really kill the effort or the momentum that they had because there was no strategy going into it. Somebody said, hey, let's do a podcast, and we just start up and we start recording, and you end up with conversations that are off track or don't have a clear North Star, and it's a really common problem.
So yeah, no strategy is definitely something we see a lot. I mean, people just get the idea, buy the equipment, and try and go without a real plan, and it ends up killing that podcast. The next one that we see all the time is no production system. So they get in there and it's hard to shoot, or they can't get the right people, and it turns out if you can't shoot your podcast, it ends up dying. Or you shot it and you can't get the assets that you were dreaming about when you started. So if you can't shoot it, or you can't edit it or process it into something, you got a big problem, and you need a system to solve that. And if you don't have it, your podcast is going to die.
Yep. And the third podcast killer is no distribution system. So if you don't have a way to distribute it consistently, it will die.
All right, so let's start talking about the first podcast killer, no strategy. And let's go a little bit deeper so the audience really understands what we're talking about when we say that. So, if you were to start a podcast without a strategy, these are some of the things that would plague that process. You would really have a lack of purpose. When you have no purpose, when you get to that situation that you were describing where it's like, oh, well, just start a podcast. Well, that's cool, but if you don't have a real reason why the podcast exists, if you don't really understand where it's going, people are going to lose interest in that. Podcast is a cool idea, but if it doesn't have a direction, you're not going to get longevity out of the team that you need to actually stay dedicated to that effort. So that's going to be a huge one. You end up with random topics. You talk about this one day, you talk about something else the next day. You had no real direction, so you're never actually going to be able to build that audience, because the audience that cares about topic 1 is not necessarily going to be the audience that cares about topic 2. So you have no direction in your content. You're not going to be able to build a real podcast and build an audience over time with randomly selected topics. Or you haven't defined that audience, and you're talking about things that doesn't necessarily interest the audience that you think that you're creating the podcast for. So if you don't know who that audience is, you don't have a prayer of talking about the right things that are going to interest them. And the last one, and I think this is the biggest one, everybody has big ambitions. We're going to talk about all these things. It's going to be great. And then we get to episode 6 or 7 or whatever it is, and we say, well, shit, we've run out of podcast ideas. We don't know what to talk about next. We've talked about everything. Our ideas have dried up. And that's nonsense. We'll get to how to get over really all of these things, but these are the symptoms of you didn't have a strategy when you started. You had an idea for a podcast, but that's where it stopped.
Yeah, there's definitely been podcast shows that I've listened to where I've listened to one episode and I was like, oh, that was really good. I really like the format, the content, the whatever it is, and I go to listen to another one and it's completely different. And so without having that clear purpose and without having those topics that aren't all over the place and knowing the audience, without having cohesiveness amongst those things, your episodes will dry up. It's just a result of it, unfortunately. So we're going to go through this today and really help you to understand what to do next and make sure that when you do strategy, you're doing it the right way to reduce the chance of any hiccups like that.
Which brings us to, how do we do strategy the right way? Obviously, we do this with our clients. We've got a formula to do this, and that's really what we kind of want to walk through with you. But the core of it is, if you are going to create a winning podcast strategy, you really need 6 core elements.
Yeah, and the first one that we're going to look at is audience. So you mentioned it earlier, but who's this for, right? What role are they in? What's the mindset that they have going into this? What challenges are they struggling with? And being able to position your podcast to a certain audience allows everything you do to align with that audience. If you have an audience of engineers and I'm talking about something, unrelated, that audience will not be engaged. That audience will not tune back in. So you have to make sure that when you define this, that you have a clear picture of who you're talking to and what it looks like. And you don't have to go full buyer persona on this, but it is important to clearly identify who this is for.
Yeah, if we're talking to a certain person that has certain challenges, it's going to help us identify what should we be talking about, how should we be talking about it, and have a litmus test for, is this relevant to this audience? If we don't know who that is, you're not going to be able to do that. So the next one is purpose. What is the purpose of the podcast? And that really goes twofold, right? First, there's the audience side of it. What information are you trying to transfer to the audience? What are you trying to get them to believe? What are you trying to show them through the information you're delivering? And then secondarily, what is the purpose for the company to do the podcast? What are we up to? Are we trying to increase awareness? Are we trying to increase our status? Are we trying to become thought leaders in our particular industry? What is the thing that we're doing this for? And I think by defining the purpose for the audience and for the company, we're going to be able to stay on the path a little bit better and make sure that when we take an action, starting a podcast, doing an episode, inviting a guest, we can align it back to that purpose and say, does that get us closer or further away from what our purpose is?
Yeah, you have to be able to align it to the purpose, because there are so many decisions that you have to make when creating content that it gives you a good baseline of, are we going the right direction? Are we, bringing the right people on? Are we saying the right things? Which leads us to the next one, number 3, which is point of view. And this is one that people skip all the time. But we really encourage people when they're going through this process with us to slow down and think about, what do you believe that your industry usually gets wrong? This is a question that sales is actually usually pretty good at answering, but a lot of people don't spend the time to think about this. But having a point of view and defining that can actually be seen through your whole show as you proceed.
So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about point of view. The reality is your audience doesn't need more content. What they need is a different way to think, or more information, or a better way to do things. And where that information comes from is from your experts that have been there, done that, have that expertise that they built up over their career, and they're sharing that information. So it's the value of the information and the perspective that comes from the company, not the fact that we have a podcast. That's why it's critical to get that point of view really detailed. What is the difference in our message that we're taking, and why is that valuable to that audience? Crystallizing that on the front end is going to help save your podcast.
Yeah, and the point of view will actually feed into the next one, which is number 4, topic architecture. So this is something that we're going to go through more in depth here in a little bit, but this is something that people usually miss. And this is earlier when we were talking about the thing that kills people is running out of episodes, or running out of ideas of what to talk about, or talking about things that are off topic. All of this can be solved with the right topic architecture. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to help you to understand the themes, the subtopics, and then essentially the episodes that will give you a never-ending runway of content for your show.
Yeah, topic architecture is huge. I know when we go through the exercise that we do with our clients and we actually get that nailed down, the comments that we get from our clients is like, oh my goodness, that is a lot of things that we could talk about. And that fear of, we're going to run out of something to say here, just dissipates almost immediately. So the next thing in the strategy is format. So this doesn't have to be set in stone, but you have to have some idea, what kind of show are we creating? Is this a solo show? Someone just sitting down and going through topics? Is it a discussion where you have two people from the company that are going to sit down and really hash out a particular topic? Is it going to be a guest show? Are you going to have a question and answer format where you have a guest coming in that might have expertise on particular topics? What is the length of this? Are you going for a 15-minute episode, a 30-minute episode, a 2-hour episode? Are you pulling a Joe Rogan and going for 3-hour marathons? I mean, what is the length that you are going to try to aim for? What's the structure? How is the show put together? How does that conversation break down? And ultimately, do you have recurring themes or segments that pop in there like a lightning round at the end or whatever it's going to be that your audience can know and expect and appreciate about your show particularly? So really nailing down what that format looks like, and this can change over time, but what do you want it to be? What should it feel like when you sit down at that first episode? What does that look like? And that's really what format is about.
And to bring this all together with number 6, we have success criteria. So essentially, how will you measure whether this is working or not? That's a question that we get often. Sometimes people will jump to metrics or KPIs that they've used in the past. We're going to get leads off of this. And if that's where you're headed, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I am saying I wouldn't recommend that as your success metric. There's lots of things, and it could be something internal for the company, something more philosophical, or it could be something more concrete. We see this divide pretty often between businesses depending on what they're trying to achieve with the content that they're creating.
Yeah, many times you're looking at success criteria. As you pointed out, if the criteria is leads, it's going to be very difficult to trace how a podcast produced that piece of business. Not that it can't happen, because it totally can and has, but tracing that or measuring that, I think, is going to be problematic for you. I think, the types of things that we want to focus on when we're talking about success criteria would be we're going to elevate our presence in the market. We're going to have our point of view known by our potential customer base. We're going to start softening the ground for our sales operations because people are hearing from us and understanding what we think, what we do, how it works. So there's definitely an opportunity for, growing in awareness or growing our reputation or increasing our authority or increasing our trust. Those are some success metrics that you really want to focus on. And there's different ways that you can hone in and start to measure some of those things. But generally speaking, you need to know what is going to be our definition of it's working. If you don't know that, you'll never be able to actually gauge it worked or it didn't work. So we've talked about audience, purpose, point of view, topic architecture, format, success criteria. All of that goes into a system that we call a podcast blueprint. So, for creating a podcast blueprint, we go through a process. There's a discovery questionnaire process. There is a strategy session that we get into with our client. And then ultimately what comes out of that is a finalized podcast blueprint, or said a different way, a podcast strategy, right? So we'll share all the components so that you can actually create that blueprint. And once you have that document, you're going to be in a much better place to start your podcast. And that takes us to the next point, which is within that blueprint, one of the things you're going to do, one of the things you're going to create is going to be your topic architecture. You're going to go through and identify common themes or recurring themes that you're going to talk about within your podcast. And for each theme, you're also going to have subtopics that are associated to that theme. So you're going to have an array of areas of discussion. And what this is going to do, it's going to be a really good starting point when it's time to sit down and say, what are the episodes we're going to produce? So, we're calling it the secret weapon, this topic architecture. I can tell you this has literally been said by some of our clients. Oh my goodness, I feel like this is our secret weapon, because we were so worried that we were going to run out of ideas. And now we see that's not real. When you get into the blueprint and you can see, hey, this is the themes, this is how this works, this is the subtopics. I understand what we're doing here, but also a little bit later, we're going to get into how do we actually use that to create episode ideas, and then how do we put that into play with our team to actually start producing those ideas. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but that topic architecture, that high level, what are the themes we're going to cover, what are the subtopics of those themes will be included in that blueprint process.
Yeah, and that's a great point. This is where people will usually get hung up, or in some cases, they try to skip it. But this is going to be the thing that will allow an endless supply of episode ideas to flow from it. Just as one example, we have a client that is in the staffing industry. And one of the things that they did when they mapped them out is they mapped out probably a dozen different themes. And you want to try to come up with say 10. Now, you may be able to make it work with 5. You may be able to make it work with 10. Some people may need more. But the reality is, let's say that you look at one of their topics, and one of their topics was food production. That's the industry that they serve. They have a lot to say about it. But then within that, they have subtopics. So within food production, they have food safety, they have training, they have quality control. And when you stop and you ask them, hey, can you talk about this topic? Can you talk about food safety? They're like, yeah, I could tell you about this and this and this and this. It's like, cool. Each one of those has the opportunity to be an episode. But by creating this topic architecture, you really have a unique advantage to have an endless supply of ideas flowing to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into more about what that is and kind of how that gets put into play here in a second. Okay, so you have your topic architecture. You have a system in which you could create ideas for episodes. But how should that actually happen? How do you apply your topic architecture to start creating those episodes?
Once you've mapped out and understand that topic architecture, you're essentially going to have a list of ideas that you could have episodes around. And what we like to do from here is build what we call an episode plan. And essentially, an episode plan is going to give you the ability to not only batch these topics together, but then plan for the quarter.
So the idea of topic architecture is that you never run out of episode ideas, which brings us to our next topic, the episode plan.
Yeah, so your episode plan is essentially going to allow you to take those episode ideas and turn them into an actual scheduled production event. And that's going to be the most important part. Is it's cool to have ideas. I love that we've brainstormed these different episodes we could create, but now we have to go through a sequential process that's going to allow us to actually create that content. So what we like to do is when we have clients go through and brainstorm the first few episodes based on their topics and subtopics, what they're going to do next is build an episode plan. And essentially, this is going to allow them to plan the next quarter. If you build an episode plan and you have 26 episodes and you're posting once every 2 weeks, or you're doing it weekly and you have 52 episode ideas, this is going to take that next step of say, what are we going to shoot this next quarter? So step one is that we're going to ideate a batch of episode topics. So you're going to be pulling episodes directly from your blueprint topic architecture that you figured out in the last step. And you're going to start using those working titles and figure out the talking points and who's involved. And what this is going to allow you to do is start to round out some of the details of what would go into that episode. So if you have a working title and you know that you need Tim and John to sit in and have this episode, well, you can begin to map that out in this episode plan, and it's really going to give you a better actionable next step for when you go to step 2, which is planning for the quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you pointed out, if you're doing a bi-weekly podcast, you're going to have about 26 episodes during the year, right? So if you can sit down and map out, these are the topics that we want to cover in these 26 episodes. These are generally the areas of discussion, and this is probably who's going to be in those episodes. It gives you a really good starting point of who might need to be where and when and how might that happen, who's an expert in what. So it's the starting of that planning process to actually be able to produce these episodes. So if you planned your, in this case, 26 episodes, you now just need to pick which ones do you want to produce this quarter, which allows you to start creating a quarterly plan. Once you get that quarterly plan, it allows you to move on to the next step, which is actually scheduling the production. Start to get your team involved who's actually going to be in the episodes, especially if you have guests involved or something like that. So if you take it from, we've thought of what the episodes are, we've selected the ones that we're going to do this quarter, now we can start tapping other people in and saying, hey, Tim or John, you're going to be here on this day, and Susan and Samantha are going to be here on this day. It lets everybody know what are we doing and when is it actually going to be lights, camera, action time? So that brings us to the end of the strategy session. We will share a document package with you that'll give you a lot of information of how you can actually do this for yourself. Strategy is only part of the equation. It'll get you a really cool document, but if you want to actually create a podcast, you got to execute on that plan, which is what we'll get into next.
So podcast killer number 2
is
dun. No production system.
And when there's no production system, there's a number of symptoms that you're also going to see that will ultimately kill a podcast. The first one's going to be scheduling chaos. You don't have a system, so you're going to start getting pushback on actually producing your episodes. You're going to have problems booking your executives. It's going to be pushed off a month or a couple months, and then before you know it, your podcast is dead. There's going to have just problems in setting up. It's going to be sporadic of when we are or aren't doing it, and bringing out the equipment and setting it up and what's going to happen next. And it's problematic for the setup of even getting it done. Editing's a lot of work. If you don't have a system of how that work is actually going to happen, it's not going to happen, or at least it's not going to happen to the extent that it should happen if you're investing the time and money in starting a podcast. And fatigue sets in. You might get some assets might go out, but you're not going to get the full set of content that you should be getting it, because it's a lot of work and it's a process and we have to figure it out every time. But if you have the right system, all of those can be eliminated.
Yeah, and speaking of the right system, if you are going to do a podcast, we always recommend, it's a non-negotiable for us, we always recommend leading with video, because you can do an audio-only podcast, but the reality is it usually is only resulting in one asset, which really hinders where you use it, how you use it, how many people you get in front of, how much awareness and trust you're actually creating from that content. So it's really, really limiting in the ability to help your audience begin to build trust in you and the content that you're creating. Unlike a video podcast where you actually can create a content system around a video podcast. So like I said, with an audio-only episode, that's it. You have limited distribution or future repurposing of that. There are some different use cases you could argue, but it is limiting, versus when you have a video podcast, you can use that full episode on YouTube. You can use it on Spotify. Apple is actually working on releasing a video version of their podcasting option right now. And then you can break that down into social clips, and those social clips can live on LinkedIn and Shorts and Instagram, and they can direct people to the full episode or previous episodes. And you can even take that video and you can take the transcript and you can break that down into things like blog posts, newsletters, webinar content, LinkedIn articles. So when you create this content waterfall with a variety of different placements and usages from only one asset, the value of it goes so much further.
And that's super important. There's a lot of companies that'll start a podcast and they're thinking audio, and that's fine. But the reality is two things. One, you are doing it to spread your message and you want to reach as many people as possible, and an audio-only podcast does not make that possible. And I think secondarily and most importantly, the people that you're involving in your podcast are probably some of the most valuable people in your organization. So if you're using their time, you need to use it wisely. Said differently, you need their time to be used in a way that can reach the maximum audience, and that's not going to happen with an audio-only podcast. Okay, so we've already covered the pieces about the strategy, but just looking at where we are in the system overall, we talked about a blueprint, we talked about a episode plan. Now it's time to get into a repeatable production system so you can actually produce this content. We're going to look at things like producing a discussion guide for your different episodes, how we're going to record these episodes, how it's actually going to happen, what you're going to create, so what you're going to get out of it, or the assets you're going to create from your recordings, and then also how are we going to get approval for these before they see the light of day? That's going to be the system that you're going to need for your production to actually happen, to actually be planned, shot, created, and approved so that it could see the light of day.
And like you said, we talked about the blueprint and the episode plan in the strategy phase, but what happens now that we're in the production phase to actually bring those ideas to life? So what we do for our clients is every episode actually gets a discussion guide. And so the reason that we do this is because one of the things that we talked about early on was staying on topic. And I have seen people create the episode plan and then they wing it, and then they sit down to record the episode. And by the end of it, they are so far in left field talking about something that has absolutely nothing to do with the initial concept that they sat down to talk about. And you want to avoid this mistake. And the way that we do that is through a discussion guide. You don't have to follow it 100%, but it's essentially an outline or a set of guides that should keep you on topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a group of experts. They know what they're talking about. That's why you're handing them the microphone. But without guardrails of some kind, sometimes they end up deviating a little bit from what you expected to get out of them. So your discussion guide is the opportunity to let your host or maybe even your guest know, this is what we're going to talk about. This is how it's going to go. This is what we're up to in general. So a discussion guide, it's going to include what the topic is. It's also going to check in and make sure that it's aligned with that blueprint. We don't want topics that aren't aligned with the blueprint. So the discussion guide is going to make sure, hey, this is how this aligns, right? You're also going to look at what's the takeaway that the audience is going to get from this. We're going to, talk for 30, 40 minutes, whatever it is. What are we trying to communicate to them? Let's get real clear on that before we invest that time. And then how are we going to communicate that? What are the 3 to 5 points that we need to make to them so that they're able to have that takeaway? What does that look like? Many times you're also going to include either prompts or some kind of question that allows the host or whoever's having the discussion to easily flow through that conversation, and they can use those questions or prompts to move that conversation along while making sure that they hit those points. And I would recommend having some kind of closing prompt as well. What are we going to say at the end? How are we going to drive this home? So, putting that all on paper is great. It gives whoever's going to be on camera a starting point for what the hell are we talking about and how is this discussion going to go, so we're not just free flowing and hoping that we get there. But it's also good to point out this is not a script. It is not going to be a script. It's not going to say, well, you say this and then I'll say that. You can't do that, especially to experts. It'll make them nervous. It'll make it weird. It'll lose authenticity immediately. So we're not over here just in a free-flowing conversation. Wherever it happens to go, we're going to go, but we're also not living in Scriptville either. We're saying, here's a structure, guys and girls. Here's what we're up to. This is where we want to go. You have the microphone. You're free to take it where you want, but this can guide you in where we would like the episode to go. All right, so we've got discussion guides. We've got a plan. We know what we're doing. We're sitting down. We're going to start producing these things, but we've got a little bit of a hurdle, which is we need to be efficient with how we're producing this stuff. We're asking our experts for their time, and their time is valuable. So how are we going to make the most of that time and still be productive in what we're up to, which is creating content and hopefully a podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to when we started talking about building your episode plan and planning for the quarter. One of the things that we talked about was mapping 6 to 12 episodes off the bat. The reason that that's important is because if you can batch record, you're able to protect the time of the expert. You're able to consistently create episodes. You're able to create essentially this pipeline that is going to feed the show so that your show never gets stale or, something comes up and you can't record a week. You're not just totally thrown off course. You have a plan. And so batch recording essentially will allow you to maximize their time while still recording what you need, so you're not scrambling for content. We're talking about recording 2 or 3 episodes in one day, and that has a lot of value. One of the things that we see is that it's actually easier on the executive. So on the day of recording, they can come in and create multiple episodes, and it can result in weeks of content. It helps them prioritize their time. It helps them know what to expect when walking in. It doesn't, it's not a big suck for them where like, oh, every week for the next 4 weeks, I've got to go in and record this. No, we're going to do it in a batch setting. And what we found is that it's actually higher quality. So if the host or the guest or whoever it is doing multiple episodes, they get in a rhythm. They find out that, hey, you know what? This was actually better than episode 1. I said this, or I did this, or I had this mannerism, or I messed up, or I led with these sentences. You can correct all that because it's top of mind, and you get in almost like a flow state where you're able to do more episodes, and you see towards the end of the day, they actually get higher quality. Now, there is a bit of a diminishing return once they get tired, but you can get usually 2 to 3 pretty strong episodes.
Yeah, and it really depends on who you're putting on camera in general. So, I mean, we've got clients that'll do 2. We have one that does 6. They come in and they do a quarter's worth of content. And it's with the CEO, and he says, look, I don't have the time to do this. I want to do it 4 times a year, and we're going to come in and we're going to crush it. And he has the energy to get through 6. I would not recommend 6 for most people. I would say probably 3 is probably the max for most people. If you're a very high energy individual, you might shoot a little bit higher than that, but it can be done in a very efficient manner. The CEO, for example, that says, look, guys, I only want to do this 4 times a year. Great, let's make that happen. And batch production allows that to actually be a possibility. One of the other pieces is the efficiency in the production is not just for the production itself, but it's also allowing that pipeline to stay full. I mean, you have the production aspect of it, but then you also have we have to have something to edit, to work on, to be able to consistently deliver the assets that we're going to be talking about, which ultimately leads to publishing protection. We want to know if we start publishing this thing and we get in a cadence, whatever it is, every other week we're going to come out with an episode, and we have this social channel going on, and we have this other content stuff going on that we're trying to hit a cadence with. We have to know, are we going to be interrupted? Are we going to get 2 months into it and then hit a roadblock and not put out an episode for a month? We can alleviate the potential for that happening if we're doing batch production and we're scheduling properly. So batch production, it's better for the executives many times because they can just get in, do what they need to do, and then be back to their quote unquote real job. And it's better for the marketing team because they're getting a lot of content at one time that they can start to put into play, put some in their back pocket for a rainy day, and continue doing the production side of things.
Yeah, and just one more thing on batch production. When you're starting out a new show, this is less valuable than when you're doing it for episodes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and beyond. In the beginning with a new show, what we typically do with clients is we recommend batch recording, but only doing maybe 2 episodes, max 3 the first time. The very first time. We're talking about episode 1, episode 2, and maybe episode 3. Now, before and we'll get to this in a little bit, but before we get into publishing, we recommend recording 3 and 4. So that way, when you publish episode 1, you already have episode 2 and 3 and 4 in the queue. But it's important that when you're starting out, if you just record episode 1 and episode 2, you can then have those edited and you can look back and say, oh, you know what, for episode 3 and 4, I'd actually like to fix A, B, or C, or I'd like to say this differently, or I'd like to sit differently or communicate differently. And you'll see these little nuances of how you want to improve, and you can make those adjustments for 3 and 4. And so then whenever you have now shot, edited, and approved 1, 2, 3, and 4, by the time that you publish episode 1, you now have a backlog of 2, 3, and 4. And we know 3 and 4 is likely better than 1 and 2 because you've seen it and made improvements. And now your show is off to a really good start where you have a solid foundation and you have a backlog of episodes that will allow you to continue feeding your pipeline.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've seen where clients are able to make micro adjustments, and sometimes they're not huge, but just seeing the first episode you're on or the first couple and saying, oh my goodness, I want to hold my head differently, or maybe I want to do my hair differently, or maybe I shouldn't say that word. Man, I said a lot of times. I need to work on that, right? So there are things that you can see if you're the one on camera that you're like, oh, I want to make these adjustments. And yes, episode 3 and 4 would be better from that, but also as you do it more, you're going to get better. So episode 3 and 4 are going to be better than episode 1, really, no matter what. Okay, so we're shooting all this content. What are we going to produce with it? What are we going to get out of it? Obviously, we're going to get a podcast episode, but what else? We've kind of alluded to there's a lot of content that you can get from this. What are those pieces and how does that happen?
Yeah, I think this is probably the most overlooked aspect when starting a B2B podcast. Most people are thinking of the single video episode that they'll get. Okay, we're going to get this and then we'll publish it on YouTube and Spotify and we'll call it a day. But what most people don't really either understand or implement or both is that there's this whole waterfall of 10 or more assets that you could be creating from a single episode. And now when you look at the ROI on your content, it's not just, oh, well, we created this one video podcast episode. It's no, this was fueling our whole content engine, and you're really able to do it in a way that you can't do with any other format. You cannot do this with an audio-only podcast. You cannot do this with a blog post, but this video podcast does allow you to essentially feed other assets.
Yeah, so when we go back to what the purpose is, we're trying to get our message in front of the right people. And the more at-bats we have to do that, the more likely that it's going to happen. So, we have our full podcast episode. Obviously, we can put that on, the likely suspects are going to be Spotify and Apple in an audio format. But as you touched on, Spotify now has video and Apple's working on getting video as well. Because it's video, we can also put it on YouTube. So YouTube is one of the fastest growing podcast platforms, and they have their own podcast program as well. So in addition to that, you can create social video posts that can be used on LinkedIn or YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or whatever platform your company plays on. You now have video content that can be used there. This is often overlooked from companies that say, oh, you know what, our content mix is a blog article or a newsletter. Podcast is just one more thing we're going to add to it. No, podcasts can become the driver for your newsletter or for your blog posts. I mean, when you have experts sitting down and having long form discussions about things, you have a wealth of information that can go beyond a podcast. You can easily take a transcript and use that transcript to create written content. So whether that's blog articles, whether that's newsletters, whether it's website content, you now have expert source material to create your written content. You don't have to have your separate expert interviews, or you don't have to make it up. You don't have to go research what the competition's doing or look in industry sources. You have the source. You sat them down. You put a microphone in front of them. Start using that to create your other forms of content, including your written content. At the end of the day, if you're doing all of this, you're not walking away with a podcast episode. You're walking away with podcasts on multiple platforms. You're walking away with social content for multiple platforms, and you're walking away with written content for multiple platforms. You can take it further than this. You can do call-out graphics. You can create a bunch of different social-type content. I think some of that is overplayed, but you can take this really far. We use 10 as the example of how many assets you might be able to get to put into play. It can be far more than that. Obviously, there's work associated, but it can be far more than that. But I think walking into it, you say, hey, you know what? Let's try and get somewhere between 5 and 10 assets out of every episode that we do. That's easy to accomplish.
So far in creating a repeatable production system, we've talked about creating a discussion guide, recording, creating a variety of content, and arguably the most important is the approval process. So you want to make sure nothing goes live without having the right stakeholders have their buy-in and have their approval on it.
The worst thing that happens is you publish something and the expert shows up in left field or legal shows up in left field and they're like, oh my goodness, you got to take that down, right? You didn't accomplish very much if you got all the way to the end, put it into play, and you get a red card, it's got to come off the field. That's not going to help you. So you really need to work in an approval process into your system and figure out who are the stakeholders that might need to review and approve this content before it sees the light of day, and bake into that process that they actually see that. And whether we're talking about, controlling the message, what we can and can't say, or what's appropriate for our brand, or just getting the maybe even the people that were on camera aligned with, okay, I said that, that's how I want to say that, or that's how I want to position this. Because sometimes they'll say something and they're like, well, that's not exactly right. What we don't want to do is make the people who are trying to position as experts saying something that's wrong, or that the audience might disagree with because it didn't have all the facts in it or whatever. And it'll happen. If you have long form content, there's going to be incomplete components, especially when you start cutting it up for social. You're like, oh, that wasn't the whole idea, or maybe I misstated that fact slightly. Let's not use that one, right? So you have to get that approval process as part of your overall system. It's going to help make the content better, but it's also going to eliminate fire drills. It's going to eliminate that problem that occurs when you as the marketing team pump out a piece of content and someone, maybe even the person that said it, comes out of left field talking about, we got to take that down.
Yeah, the worst thing you could do is publish an episode to YouTube and then they watch it live after maybe a couple days and it's got thousands of views or whatever, and then they say, oh, you know what, we actually can't say that thing. You have to take that out of the video. It's like, okay, but I can't just replace the video file. So now you basically have to have it edited and re-upload it and start over. You lose all the engagement, you lose all the traction, it looks weird. So you're basically gonna be in a really uncomfortable situation that could have been avoided if you went through a proper approval process.
So that brings us to the end of the production system aspect of things. So we've talked about strategy, we've talked about production. You know, if you're like most of the clients we work with, they're like, okay, cool, we have something, let's go ahead and publish it. But there's more to a distribution system than simply publishing a podcast episode. When that happens, when the focus becomes on just publishing that episode, you never get the real value. You're not maximizing the opportunity to repurpose your content and really get that in front of your audience, which causes you to get less attention. And if you're not producing those other components within your distribution plan, if you're not taking all of the assets and really figuring out not just, hey, we're going to post it to the podcast platform, but we have all of these social assets and we have all of these written content pieces and we have all this stuff. If we don't have a plan to put that in action, you're going to be pretty inconsistent. So from the very start, if we know what we're going to be producing, we also have to have a plan of how each and every one of those assets is going to reach our audience, and that's where our distribution plan comes in.
The third and most important system in this whole webinar is building a distribution system. And like you said, that distribution system is going to allow you to stay top of mind and be consistent to your audience, which is going to help your show and your content grow and build trust. So the first step in building a distribution system is the podcast distribution itself. This is probably the most obvious and usually the easiest one, but it doesn't stop there. So with podcast distribution, this is where you can take the full video and in some cases audio, and you can publish it across YouTube and Spotify and Apple. And this is where people will find and listen to your full episode. But that's where most people stop. And they don't understand the value of being able to deliver social content or article and written content. And so when we look at number 2, we look at social distribution, because this is a really, really easy one to do, because all you're doing is taking 4 to 6 little clips out of the full episode, and you're essentially putting them into places like LinkedIn or YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or TikTok. And I hear all the time from people like, oh, well, my audience isn't on TikTok, or my audience is. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They might not be there expecting or looking for the type of content that you're producing, but that doesn't mean they're on there, and that doesn't mean that if they don't discover it or you don't share it in a certain way that they won't be able to find and follow you on that platform. But social distribution, the way that I look at it is it's almost a feeder to the full episode. So if you see this social clip and the host or the guest or whoever's on camera says something that really resonates with you, what are you going to do? You're going to want to learn more. You're going to want to go create a way to digest that whole episode so that you can learn whatever it is that they're trying to have you understand.
Yeah, if you're interested in the topic, you very well may go look for the full episode. If you're on YouTube Shorts, you can link it. I mean, there's a direct link to go to the full episode. I mean, that's the entire purpose of that link. But even if they don't, even if they never go and listen to the full episode, even if no one ever listens to the full episode, that actually just increases the value of the social distribution. You want your message to be heard. If no one's listening to the full episode, you need that social component to be able to deliver the key points of the conversation to a wider audience, not just the people that listen to the full conversation. So social distribution is valuable. Make sure you have that as part of your distribution plan. But you also have to have the written forms, right? Your article publishing. If you're going to take the time to take your transcript and really create blog articles or LinkedIn articles or whatever it's going to be, that has to be part of that distribution plan. So you're sure it actually happens. Is it posting to your website? Is it going out into the LinkedIn article system? Is that coming from the person? Is it coming from the company? What's the distribution plan to put that content into play? The same with your newsletter. If you're pulling out content for the newsletter, okay, how is that happening? When is that happening? And hey, are we still sending that newsletter? Is that still, something we're doing monthly or quarterly, or what does that look like? So if you're going to invest in the content, make sure that you're getting the assets as we already talked about. But if you have the assets, you have to have a plan to put them into play.
I agree. And putting it all into play is what this webinar is all about. So when we stop and we look at all three things and how they work together, we have a strategy system, we have a production system, and we have a distribution system. This allows you to think about it, create it, and then get it out there.
Absolutely. You have three systems. They all work together. And, if you nail the strategy, if you nail the production, if you nail the distribution, and if you understand how each one of those components contributes to the overall success of your podcast, you're going to be a lot better off. And you're going to be able to accomplish what 80 to 90% of the podcasts that start never accomplish, which is actually have your message heard, actually increase the awareness of you, your brand, and ultimately build trust in your professionals, in your company, in your solution. So that's what we're up to if we're doing a podcast as a company. And if you follow these systems and really plan them effectively, you're going to be successful in doing that. So the big question is, should you start a B2B podcast? And I think there's, if you've made it this far, probably the answer is yes, because you haven't discounted that you're going to do it. But likely suspects are you have real subject matter expertise. You have people that can deliver value on a microphone. You think that your audience would benefit from hearing these insights from those experts. There's a long-term commitment. You're not going to get in and do an episode or two and be like, oh, well, we're done with that. You need buy-in for a long term. It takes a while for a podcast to get traction. You need to have everybody on the same page of, we're going to do this and we're going to do it for a while, right? Willingness to commit to video is a big one, right? So, hey guys, we're going to put you not just on a microphone, we're going to put you on camera as well. So are we all good with that? Because it's going to be part of it. That's how we're going to get the value. Everybody's got to be comfortable with video here. And I can tell you, some won't be comfortable on day one, but you do get comfortable and it'll be fine. And then ultimately, your goal is you want to have an active voice in the market. If that's what your goal is, hey, creating a podcast is a really good way to make that happen. On the other hand, if you look at it and go, you know what, we're a humdrum company, we're, commodity, whatever, we're no different than the guy down the street, we don't have a unique point of view, you know what, maybe a podcast isn't your friend here. What are you going to say? We have better service over and over again. We're cheaper. That doesn't make a good podcast. So if that's what you're dealing with, podcast may not be for you. If you don't have internal champions, if you don't have somebody that's like, you know what, that sounds fun. Let's do this. Let's sit down. I can talk. I'll be a host. I want to participate. If you don't have that, it might be a red flag for maybe this isn't the best the best way forward for you. If you're trying to achieve results quickly too, right? So, hey, we need to hurry up and do this thing because of X, Y, or Z. This is not going to be a immediate win for you. So podcast is not going to be, the thing that's going to turn your company around or fix your sales problem or whatever it's going to be. So if that's what you're trying to do and you're trying to do it quickly, don't look to a podcast because that's not what it's going to be about. Someone that says, hey, look, we just want audio only. We just want to be there. I personally think that's a waste of time at this point. So I would say that's probably a red flag. And then you hear a lot of people that are like, oh, we're the best kept secret. They're bragging about it. If that's what you want to brag about, if that's your goal, guess what? A podcast is not for you because it will spread awareness. So if you want to stay the best kept secret, don't start a podcast. The reality is when you're starting a podcast, you're not just creating a show, you're creating a system that allows your show to be successful. Ultimately, what you want to create is a content engine for you to be able to deliver your message to your audience. If you nail your strategy, your production, and your distribution, you have the opportunity to create the most valuable content asset that your company has, and it'll be your podcast.
Which brings us to a good point of what's next. What do you do next in order to actually get the ball moving? If you said, hey, you know what, I think this is a really good idea for me or my organization. I think that we've got the right people. I think we've got the right mindset. I think that we agree with kind of all the points that you've listed before. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so you're going to start with step one. You're going to start with creating that podcast blueprint. And we've prepared a package for everybody to get started on this easily. We're going to give you our questionnaire. We're going to give you kind of that framework and really give you an example of what this blueprint looks like. So you can start your team in that discovery process. You can have your strategy session, and ultimately you can come out the other side with a podcast blueprint. And that is your ultimate goal. You're going to want to do that before you start worrying about how are we going to produce this thing, or how are we going to distribute it. None of that matters unless you have a direction that you're rowing in. The first step for everybody is going to be get that podcast blueprint. If you're listening to this and you're on the webinar, we'll drop it a link to it in the chat. There's no form to fill out. We don't need your information. We don't need anything from you. You just directly download it. If you are on LinkedIn currently, we'll include a link to it here as well. If you don't see that, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a DM and I can send it over to you. So we want people to have these assets. It is going to be valuable for you. If you're thinking podcast, it'll give you a really good idea of where should we start, and if you start, how to make the rest of the journey a lot easier because you have that plan. There will be companies that are perfectly capable of doing this themselves. I will tell you, we can help you do this as well. So if you get into it and you're like, you know what, I really want help with somebody who's been there, done this before, we need somebody to facilitate this for us, we can help you with that. Reach out to us. We can help you with that process as well. So, there's a lot of people I think that are going to get value from starting this correctly, and that podcast blueprint is the correct place to start.
All right. So with that, I know that we've covered a lot today. I know that there's probably going to be some questions that you may have. So we're going to use this time to field some Q&A. We will take questions from both the webinar platform as well as from LinkedIn. So if you have a question, drop it in there. If we don't have time to get to them all today, we will follow up with you, or we'll be creating additional content around those questions, because I know that if you have that question, there are probably dozens of other people who also share in that same question.
Feel free to connect with me or connect with Adam. Send us a DM and we can answer your question if we don't get to it. So the first one that I'm getting is, what if we don't have a studio or professional equipment? And that's okay. Most people don't. If you haven't started a podcast, why would you have that stuff, right? So there's really two options. It's either figure out what you would need to create a recording environment at your office, your facility, your whatever, or find a studio or an ability to contract somewhere that has that equipment and ability for you to go in and produce that type of content. So you can do it yourself. You can have someone else do it, but you are going to have to solve that. If you're producing a video podcast, you are going to have to solve that particular problem.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think that, for us sitting in a podcast studio, it makes it really easy. You just come in here and you record. But if you are doing this at your office, where you're going to build out a podcast recording room, probably the best advice that I would give based on our experience is find a place where you can keep it set up. Generally, whenever we see people and they have to reset it up every time, or there's just it gets real messy. So I think that that's one of the key things in deciding is ease of recording, right? If you have to, we have 5 cameras here, we have 5 lights, we have more than that. But if we had to set those up every time, it would be a huge hurdle.
Definitely. So next question. How long does it take before a podcast would start to see some kind of results? That's definitely a loaded question. Yeah, right. We aren't sure. No, the reality is after your first episode, you're going to start creating results, right? Again, what are we up to? We're up to communicating a message to our audience. After episode 1, When the first person listens to it, guess what? You've created a result. Now, I'm not saying that only one person is going to listen to it, but you're on the path to the results that you're looking for, which is spreading your message, positioning yourself as an expert.
Assuming you follow the distribution plan properly.
Well, that you followed all the steps properly. But yeah, so if you're wanting to look for a specific result, you'd have to get more specific of what is that result. But the reality is you're going to get traction on day one. As soon as you start distributing this content, you're going to get what you want, which is people listening to your message and people starting to view you in a different way, increase in awareness about what you're talking about, and elevate your authority within that particular audience.
All right, so another question that came up was, we have multiple subject matter experts. How do we handle the format? Do we have one host, or do we include all of the subject matter experts? And this can definitely be a little bit tricky, especially if there's a bit of a dynamic in the office of who the experts are, and if there's other experts and they know there's other experts. Obviously, you don't want to get in a situation where you're stepping on any toes, but I think that there is a strategic approach that needs to happen with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind, there's no right answer. Your podcast is your podcast. You can do whatever the hell you want, but you want to have some sort of consistency in that format. You don't want to bring someone in who seems like the host and then take them away. So you could have a host and then have a rotating chair of other experts that come in, or you could have two chairs that rotate with different experts, whoever happens to be an expert in that topic. I will say the biggest hurdle here is not that you have a lot of experts that you want to put on camera. That's fine. The biggest hurdle is how wide of a scope are your conversations going? Are you still talking to one audience, or are you talking to multiple? Because if you're talking to multiple audiences, that's multiple podcasts. Your podcast is for one audience. So multiple people's fine as long as that's consistent. Make sure that it's for a singular audience. If not, maybe you need more than one podcast. Okay, next question. Who actually does all the post-production and the distribution work?
You do. You do all of it.
Good question.
Yeah. No, I think that it depends, right? And it's going to depend on your organization, your size, your resources, what you can do. You can, for the editing side or the post-production side, you can hire a freelancer. If you find a really good freelancer, they could help you out on the post-production side, taking in the footage that you have captured and turning it into kind of the content waterfall that we talked about. Another option would be to hire in-house to have people that would edit it. This is an option. We have found that with most clients, sometimes it can be a bigger hurdle than it really makes sense. But again, depending on the type of content you're creating, your organization size, the cadence of episodes, it may make sense for you. And the third option would be if you have a podcast partner. If there is an agency that you align with that will handle all of the production and post-production and distribution aspects of it, you can be in a really good place where you basically come in and just shoot. So there's 3 different ways that you can attack it. It's going to make sense on a case-by-case basis with where you are and your organization. But in reality, I think that with today's day and age and the technology that exists, there's really no reason to not do it because you have options. Yeah,
the reality of that question is either you or somebody on your team is doing it, or someone else is doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the choices, and you can make a decision based on that. I think most of the clients that we've worked with or have had the opportunity to even talk to aren't even entertaining the idea of adding headcount to get it done.
Right.
Usually their marketing team is already pretty well overworked. They have full-time jobs. They don't need an extra thing, and they're not willing to add another person to get this done. That's when a freelance person may make sense. We come in and say, hey, they're just going to do this one thing that our marketing team couldn't take on. Or, as you pointed out, you get a full service partner that just says, hey, we go in, we record, and everything else just automatically happens, right?
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. If you do decide to attempt to do it in-house, don't just pawn it off on somebody else and say, hey, I need you to start editing these episodes. Usually if they don't have the skills or background or even desire in some cases to actually do that, the end result will suffer. So make sure whatever route you choose that it is a good, high quality end product that will come out of it just for the success of your show.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take one more and then we will wrap this up. I'm pretty sure we are over time, but we'll do one more. So how much time does the host actually need to commit to the podcast? And I think this is similar to the other one. It depends on how involved they're going to be in these things, right? So, I mean, for most of our clients, the host doesn't want to be really involved. Sometimes they're coming up with some of the ideas and that kind of stuff, but a lot of times they're really just showing up, talking in front of a microphone, and then they're gone. So the answer is it depends. It depends on their involvement in the process. We do work with a few clients that say, hey, I want to be involved in the ideation. I want to be involved in the production. I want to be involved in the distribution. I want to have my hands in all of it. And if that's the case, it can be a significant amount of time. If you have somebody that says, I don't have a significant amount of time, but I'm willing to be involved and I'm an expert, you can work through that too. It's pretty easy to build that into the systems that we talked about to minimize the time it actually takes from that individual. So the real answer is it depends, but you can control and they can control based on their level of involvement, how much time would they need to commit to actually make that podcast successful with them. I think that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you everybody for joining us for this presentation. Hopefully you got something out of it. Again, if you have questions, find Adam or myself on LinkedIn. Reach out, DM us. We're happy to answer any question that you have. Again, we will be putting the link out for the downloadable component, so hopefully that gets you started. If you get in there and you have questions, feel free to message us, or if you just find out, hey, we don't want to do this by ourselves, let us know. We have programs that can help facilitate that for you. So again, thank you everybody for your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.